She stepped into the first-class cabin wearing a dress that was elegant but simple. No designer logos, no sparkling jewels, no air of entitlement. A legitimate first-class ticket in hand, yet it wasn't enough to shield her from the judgmental stares, the hushed snickers, or the cold voice of the head flight attendant suggesting she was in the wrong place. No one in that cabin knew the aircraft door would open once more, just minutes later. And this time it wouldn't be a late passenger, but a billionaire. Her husband, the principal shareholder of the very airline they were flying, and he was about to turn her humiliation into a professional reckoning for those who had dared to underestimate her. In a cabin full of people who believed money defined status, they were about to learn a harsh truth. True class never needs to prove itself. The luxurious first-class cabin fell silent when the flight attendant stepped in front of Seraphine. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. This section is for first-class passengers only." The stares from the wealthy passengers pierced Seraphine like daggers as her legitimate ticket was openly questioned. No one imagined that within minutes, Everlyn Vasquez, billionaire, Seraphine's devoted husband and majority owner of this very airline, would walk through that door and completely shift the power dynamic in a cabin full of hasty judgments. Seraphine Mendez nervously adjusted the watch on her wrist, a gift from her husband that reminded her of their first meeting. At 35, her simple yet elegant dress stood in contrast to the designer outfits and sparkling jewelry that dominated the priority boarding area. The first-class cabin of Stellar Airways gleamed with spacious leather seats, impeccably dressed flight attendants, and the aroma of freshly served champagne. Everlyn had insisted that she enjoy this flight alone as a reward for the successful charity event she had organized. "You deserve all the luxury in the world," he had told her before being called to an emergency meeting. He promised to meet her at the resort a few hours later. Seraphine took a deep breath and handed her first-class ticket to the attendant at the gate. It was time to allow herself a bit of the luxury she usually avoided, despite being married to one of the richest men in the country. "I'm sorry, but this area is for first-class passengers only," said Karen Reynolds, the head flight attendant, her cold gaze assessing Seraphine's modest dress. Her condescending tone sliced through the air like a blade. Tall and impeccably groomed, Karen wore her blonde hair in a tight bun. Her crisp navy uniform, adorned with gold stripes, looked more like a display of superiority than a badge of service. "I have a first-class ticket," Seraphine replied calmly, extending her boarding pass. Karen took it gingerly, as if afraid of contamination, her manicured nails gleaming under the cabin lights. "There seems to be some kind of error," Karen said, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising in doubt. "You were incorrectly entered into the system," she said, making a show of examining the ticket from multiple angles. Her lips pursed in exaggerated skepticism. A man in an expensive suit looked up from his financial newspaper, his gold cufflinks catching the light as he lowered his reading glasses. "Happens all the time," he commented loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Economy class is getting too crowded these days." Several first-class passengers glanced up, some with barely concealed smirks, others with uncomfortable curiosity. A couple in matching designer outfits whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Seraphine and her modest attire. Karen smiled with false sympathy, her teeth blindingly white. "Let me check if there's a place for you in the back of the plane. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there." The emphasis on comfortable carried a clear message. "You don't belong here." Seraphine felt her face burn, a flush creeping up her neck. "Please check again." "My husband purchased this seat specifically for me," she said, maintaining her poise. Years of professional training as a flight attendant, herself coming to her aid. "Your husband?" A woman wearing a diamond necklace the size of a small grape laughed softly, her voice dripping with condescension. "Darling, everyone says something like that when they want an upgrade. Next, you'll tell us he's a CEO or something equally creative." Discreet laughter rippled through the cabin as Karen motioned to another crew member, exchanging knowing looks. Seraphine touched the watch Everlyn had given her the day they met, when she was still a flight attendant herself. The cool metal against her skin grounded her. Memories of the simpler life she led before meeting him gave her strength. She had faced prejudice before, but never expected to encounter it from colleagues in the profession she had once loved. A businessman nearby tapped impatiently on his armrest. "Some of us have meetings to get to," he muttered to no one in particular. "Can we resolve whatever this is and take off?" Karen straightened her already perfect posture. Please wait here while I resolve this misunderstanding, she said with an artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. Perhaps it's better if you wait at the boarding gate while we clarify the situation. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Seraphine felt a wave of conflicting emotions: embarrassment, indignation, and a flicker of anger. She could easily mention that she was the wife of Everlyn Vasquez, principal shareholder of Stellar Airways. One word from her could change everything in an instant, but something inside her resisted. Why should she need her husband's name to be treated with dignity? The cabin manager approached, his expression serious beneath his perfectly positioned hat. Ma'am, it appears we have a problem with your reservation. I'll need to ask you to accompany me off the aircraft while we resolve this. His tone was professional but firm, brooking no argument. The looks of pity and disdain from the other passengers weighed on her as Seraphine struggled to maintain her dignity. A woman in her 60s wearing what appeared to be a full set of sapphires clicked her tongue disapprovingly. A young executive typing on his laptop barely suppressed a smirk. Seraphine stood her ground, her voice quiet but steady. My ticket is valid. I have every right to be here. Karen's smile tightened. Security protocols, ma'am. We can't have just anyone sitting in first class without proper verification. Just anyone. The words hung in the air, laden with implication. It was at that moment that the aircraft door opened. The door swung open with deliberate precision, revealing the imposing silhouette of Everlyn Vasquez. Standing 6'2" with broad shoulders, his presence commanded attention without effort. His impeccable navy blue Tom Ford suit, tailored to perfection, contrasted with his confident, relaxed posture. Silver threads at his temples added distinction to his otherwise dark hair, cut in an executive style that spoke of power without ostentation. The cabin fell silent. Everlyn's steel blue eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the space methodically before locking onto Seraphine being confronted by the staff. His expression remained neutral, but those who knew him might recognize the slight tightening around his eyes, a warning sign of the controlled fury building beneath his composed exterior. Seraphine? Everlyn's voice was deep and measured, yet somehow filled the entire cabin. Is there a problem? Karen and the manager exchanged panicked glances, uncertainty replacing their previous confidence. Sir, we're just resolving a small seating confusion, the manager explained, his tone suddenly solicitous, his body language shifting to accommodate this unexpected variable. Everlyn walked down the aisle with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned not just the plane but the very air around him. Each deliberate step brought him closer to the confrontation, passengers shrinking back instinctively as he passed. But that's my wife's seat, 2A, correct? His accent carried the faintest hint of his Spanish heritage, giving his words a melodic quality that belied their authority. Your wife? Karen repeated, the color draining from her face like water from a broken vessel. The whisper that traveled through the cabin was immediate and electric. Everlyn positioned himself beside Seraphine, one hand gently touching the small of her back, a gesture both protective and claiming. His six-figure watch gleamed subtly on his wrist, not ostentatious, but unmistakably valuable to the knowing eye. Yes, Seraphine Mendez Vasquez, my wife. Has there been an issue with her accommodation? His question, though phrased politely, carried the unmistakable weight of someone accustomed to getting answers. The manager's composure cracked visibly. Mr. Vasquez, we had no idea. We were just following protocol to verify. Verify what exactly? Everlyn asked, his gaze steady and penetrating as it moved deliberately from the manager to Karen, pinning each in turn. Whether she belongs in first class based on her appearance? The cabin fell into absolute silence, the kind that seems to swallow even the sound of breathing, as the realization of who he was and the magnitude of their mistake began to dawn on everyone present. The cabin fell into absolute silence, the kind that seems to swallow even the sound of breathing, as the realization of who he was and the magnitude of their mistake began to dawn on everyone present. Mr. Vasquez, we didn't know, Karen stammered, her face now completely pale. All previous arrogance evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. The badge on her uniform visibly trembled, the gold pins catching light with each nervous movement. Sweat beaded along her hairline, threatening her perfect makeup. Everlyn's presence seemed to expand, filling the cabin with an almost palpable energy. Though he hadn't raised his voice or made any aggressive movement, the power dynamic had shifted seismically. At 45, He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from the ground up, not through inheritance or luck, but through intelligence and unwavering determination. Clearly, he replied. The single word hung in the air like a verdict. Everlyn carefully observed the scene, his eyes a penetrating blue that one business magazine once described as capable of seeing through corporate smokescreens. He registered every detail. Seraphine's embarrassment, her shoulders slightly hunched despite her efforts to appear composed, the now wide-eyed looks of the passengers, some frantically tapping on their phones as they recognized him. The flight crew's sudden, almost comical, shift in posture from authoritative to servile in seconds. When Everlyn spoke, his voice remained calm, steady, composed, but there was a gravity to it, an unspoken command in his tone that made every word land with the weight of truth and authority. Did you know, he began, his eyes scanning the stunned faces before him, that before we married, Seraphine was the youngest head flight attendant in the history of Stellar Airways? His hand rested protectively at the small of Seraphine's back, a subtle gesture, but one that spoke volumes. It was both grounding and affirming, as if to silently say, I see you, I honor you, I'm with you. She understands more about protocol and service than probably everyone in this cabin combined, he continued. A hush fell over the passengers, as if the air itself dared not move. An audible sigh broke the silence. The woman with the oversized diamond necklace, who just moments ago had scoffed at Seraphine, was now hunched over the in-flight magazine, staring blankly at a page she hadn't turned in minutes. Her perfectly manicured fingers twisted her wedding band over and over, the nervous tick betraying her discomfort. The businessman who had loudly complained about delays suddenly found his shoes fascinating, his gaze glued to the floor like a child caught misbehaving. Everlyn continued, his voice softening just slightly, not with weakness, but with pride. She once prevented a mid-air emergency by noticing a passenger's symptoms before even the man himself realized something was wrong. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle before adding, she saved his life. The words carried no exaggeration, only fact. The airline gave her a commendation, Everlyn said, a plaque still displayed at headquarters. Though I'm beginning to wonder if anyone here has actually seen it. Karen, standing mere feet away, looked stricken. Her complexion, already pale, had drained of all color. The authority in her posture had evaporated. She now looked like a student facing a principal, her chin lowered slightly, hands clasped tightly behind her back. The cabin manager shifted nervously beside her, tugging at his collar as a bead of sweat slowly traced its way down his temple. He looked like a man drowning in his own uniform. Everlyn continued, his tone perfectly even, controlled but undeniably commanding. I asked for the flight to wait for my arrival, he said. I wanted to surprise my wife. He paused again, this time more deliberately, a faint edge entering his voice. It seems I arrived at an opportune moment. The way he said opportune, slow, intentional, was a masterstroke in restraint. It didn't need to be shouted. The threat was in the silence that followed, in the way the cabin collectively held its breath. He turned his full attention to the manager, who now clutched his cap in both hands, holding it in front of him like a flimsy shield. As the majority shareholder of Stellar Airways, Everlyn said slowly, I am deeply concerned about what I've witnessed here today. The phrase majority shareholder exploded in the cabin without needing to be shouted. A gasp came from a passenger near the window. Several people shifted uncomfortably. A woman exhaled sharply through her nose as if trying to catch her breath. Karen had to lean against the back of a seat to stay upright, her knuckles white where she gripped the leather. The power she once radiated had vanished, replaced by the unmistakable energy of fear. Mr. Vasquez, the manager began, voice cracking under the weight of the moment. I can assure you this was an isolated misunderstanding. Everlyn raised one hand, elegant, quiet, and final. The manager's words died on his lips. The room seemed to shrink around them. Misunderstandings, Everlyn said, his tone almost conversational, have consequences, don't they? There was no need to raise his voice. The threat wasn't in the volume, it was in the certainty behind every syllable. Without another word, Everlyn pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and began typing, each movement precise, fluid, and unapologetically decisive. I've just sent an email to the board, he announced. Starting tomorrow, all Stellar Airways employees will undergo a new anti-discrimination training program. He looked up slowly, eyes locking on Karen. Miss Reynolds, he said, his gaze unwavering, you'll have the honor of being the first participant. Miss Reynolds, he said, his gaze unwavering, you'll have the honor of being the first participant. Karen swallowed hard, her throat visibly constricting. Words failed her. Her career, once so carefully built, now flashed before her eyes like pages in a burning book. The silver wings pin on her uniform, once worn with pride, now felt impossibly heavy, like a weight she could no longer carry. As for the position of Director of Customer Experience that we were discussing, filling, Evelyn continued, turning to the manager, I believe my wife, with her previous experience at the company and her recent experience as a customer, will be perfectly qualified to take over, if she wishes. Seraphine's eyes widened slightly. This was the first time she had heard of such a position. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself. Everlyn then addressed the passengers, his voice projected for all to hear, without ever needing to raise it. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. As compensation, champagne will be complimentary throughout the flight. Then just for Karen, though still loud enough for those nearby, he added. Karen nodded silently, her empire of arrogance crumbling completely before everyone. The transformation was complete, from imperious authority figure to humble servant in the span of minutes. She stepped back, motioning to the other flight attendants to begin service immediately. No one in the cabin missed the irony or the lesson. The businessmen who had been dismissive now looked on with newfound respect, not just for Everlyn's power, but for Seraphine's dignity throughout the ordeal. At the luxurious beachfront resort, Seraphine and Everlyn shared a glass of wine on the private balcony of their suite, the sunset tinting the ocean in golden hues. The flight, after the initial confrontation, had continued in heavy, uncomfortable silence. The tension was tangible, like a thread stretched too tight. Karen, once so confident and commanding, now moved through the aisle with quiet steps and lowered eyes. Her posture was stiff, her words measured, and every time she approached Seraphine, it was with an almost painful deference, as if each polite gesture was a reminder of her earlier mistake. Seraphine sat calmly, but her thoughts still swirled. She felt the weight of the stairs, some curious, some embarrassed, but Everlyn's hand in hers grounded her. Later at the beachfront resort, the sky had turned a gentle lavender, the sun sinking into the ocean in golden waves. On the private balcony of their suite, the world felt distant, quiet, safe. They clinked glasses gently, wine catching the light like a flame between them. You always knew how to make an entrance, Seraphine said, a small smile tugging at her lips, her tone light, but filled with affection. Everlyn laughed softly, a warm, genuine sound. He reached for her hand again, thumb gently tracing over her skin. This wasn't how I planned our reunion, he admitted, gazing out at the endless horizon. I wanted to surprise you with a private dinner, maybe a dance under the stars. He turned back to her, smile widening just slightly. But I confess, it was satisfying to see their expressions. Seraphine chuckled, but her smile faded as she looked out over the water, thoughtful. You know, she said after a pause, for years I've avoided using your name, your status. I didn't want to be seen as just your wife. I wanted to be me, recognized for my own merits, not as Mrs. Vasquez, but as Seraphine Mendez. Everlyn leaned forward slightly, listening with full attention. And you did, he said without hesitation. You've accomplished more than most people dream of. The charity event you organized, it raised more money for underprivileged children than any other in the Foundation's history. That was all you, Seraphine. She looked down, fingertips brushing the watch he had given her years ago. The soft metal, worn and familiar, pressed coolly against her wrist. It had always been more than just a timepiece. It was a reminder of beginnings, of belief, of becoming. Sometimes, she said quietly, I miss my independence. The career I was building before everything changed. Before us. Everlyn studied her face with gentle intensity, his voice low but steady. That's why I created the position of Director of Customer Experience, and he said, not to give you a title, but to give you a space where your voice shapes something meaningful. It's not a favor, Seraphine. It's because you're the most qualified person I know. Seraphine blinked in surprise, her brow lifting slightly. You planned this before what happened on the plane. Everlyn smiled softly, his expression filled with quiet pride. It was meant to be your anniversary gift, he admitted. But after today, I think the timing was perfect. You've always had the experience, the vision, but now you've also seen the cracks in the system. You know what needs to change. Seraphine looked at him, eyes shining, lips parting slightly as emotion swelled in her chest. "You never stopped believing in me," she whispered, "even when I doubted myself." He reached across the table, touching the watch gently. "Remember what I told you when I gave you this?" he said. "That time is the only luxury that truly matters. Not money, not power, just time, and what we choose to do with it, who we choose to spend it with." She nodded slowly, eyes drifting to the horizon again, but this time with clarity. She remembered. She remembered that first meeting, years ago when Evelyn had been a rising young executive in seat 3B, and she was a flight attendant serving coffee with a kind smile and professional grace. That flight attendant, Evelyn continued, voice rich with emotion, taught me more about dignity and excellence in a 3-hour flight than I learned in years of boardrooms. I didn't fall in love with Mrs. Vasquez, the billionaire's wife. I fell in love with Serafine Mendez, the woman who treated every passenger the same, from the CEO in first class to the scared child traveling alone in economy. That's the woman who changed my life. Serafine reached out and squeezed his hand, her own trembling slightly. The last rays of sunlight reflected off the face of the watch, casting a soft golden glow across their joined hands. It didn't just mark time, it marked the time they had lived, grown, and risen together. "So," Evelyn asked gently, tilting his head, "what does the future director of customer experience think about transforming Stellar Airways?" Seraphine looked at him, and for the first time in a long while felt like her past, present, and future had aligned in one single breathtaking moment. She smiled, her voice full of purpose and peace. "I think," she said, "it's time for a new chapter."